Hey, Tommy. We interrupt this program for some breaking news. In fact, it's the biggest news of the year for the automotive world because we've just learned that FCA and PSA have officially merged. And that's big news because in this video, we're going to go over what that means to you guys. There's about 8 to 10 brands that are affected. It, of course, affects hundreds of thousands of people and their jobs. And it's a sign of a bigger, more interesting thing that's happening in the automotive world, and that is, of course, electrification and autonomy. And so in this video, we're going to go over all that, but first, we're going to give you the breaking news, and we're going to talk about what it means for the brands that we know and cover, such as Ram and Jeep. So you want to get started with what we know so far?
Yep, so this is official. There's a 50-50 share swap between the companies. So they are describing this as a 50-50 merger. But if you really dive into the numbers and look behind what's happening, it kind of isn't 50-50. It's not as equitable as that. And we'll talk about that now.
Yeah, basically the new company, which we don't know what it's going to be called, but we're taking a guess up there on the board. So it's PSA plus FCA, and we're thinking, just for fun, it might be called FCPSA.
Right.
That's a mouthful. But basically, it's the brands in America that represent Fiat, Dodge, Ram, Chrysler, Alfa Romeo, and Maserati.
And Jeep.
Merging, let's call it actually maybe an acquisition, with PSA, which now controls Peugeot, Citroën, DS, Opel, and the Vauxhall brand.
Yep.
But from a revenue standpoint, PSA is a much stronger company. And while they're calling it a merger of equals, the stock market has got a different take on it.
So according to Bloomberg, shares of Fiat Chrysler jumped 10% Thursday after the two sides announced a deal. Peugeot owner PSA fell by about the same amount. So if you kind of dive deeper into that, according to Bloomberg, adjusting for differences in market values and a 5.5 billion euro dividend being paid out to FCA shareholders, achieving a 50-50 sharehold suggests PSA is paying a 32% premium to assume control of FCA, according to an analyst. So basically, if you read between the lines, even though it's 50-50, it's technically not equitable, and we can see that based on who the new CEO of the combined company is going to be.
Yep, the CEO of PSA, Carlos Tavares, who's known for really incredible cost cutting.
Yep.
That's kind of his claim to fame, and is the current Peugeot CEO, is going to be the CEO of the new combined company. The chairman of FCA, John Elkann, is going to remain the chairman. What does that mean for Mike Manley, who is the current CEO of FCA? We don't know at this point.
Right.
But once again, with the CEO leadership being taken up by the head of PSA, this looks more like an acquisition than it does a merger.
A straight-up merger.
Yeah, even though on the board, both companies will get 5 of the 11 seats, and we don't know who that last seat's going to go to.
Right, exactly. So the companies claim it will save $4 billion without closing any plants. Now, let's kind of talk about some of the benefits for FCA, Fiat Chrysler automobiles here in the US, as well as the PSA brands, Peugeot, Citroën, DS, by the way, is luxury, Citroën, Opel, and Vauxhall abroad. So what is each company getting out of the merger?
Well, I think what FCA is getting, Tommy, is a lot of electrification and autonomy technology and expertise, because out of all the companies that are based here in the United States, Chevy, Ford, and FCA is by far the least advanced down the road to electrification. Sergio, who used to be the chairman of FCA before he passed away, laid out this very ambitious plan to modernize and to electrify all the vehicles. But the expertise just wasn't there. When you think about it, FCA doesn't have a lot of electrification.
Right.
They have the Pacifica, which is a plug-in hybrid, but it doesn't go much deeper than that, unfortunately.
No, you're right. Now, abroad, if you go to like European markets, PSA does have some electrification. So I believe Peugeot has an electrified version of the 208. There's also, I think, a Corsa that's been electrified as well. So they have steps in the right direction there. They're also moving quickly toward autonomy. So basically, these two companies realize the future does not lie in old school internal combustion engines. It lies in these new alternative fuel sources or renewable fuel sources, as well as self-driving vehicles. So it really is an expertise gain there. Now, what does PSA gain out of it? Well,
It's two words, Tommy.
What?
Ram and Jeep.
Yeah, but I think
Ram and Jeep.
hold up. I think it's more than that because PSA has kind of been searching for a way into the U.S. market for a while now.
Right.
This is potentially a great way to get Peugeots into your hands or Citroëns into your hands as well. But yes, Ram and Jeep certainly is part of it.
Yeah, I mean, the jewels in the crown of the FCA family of brands, of course, at one point were Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Ram, and Jeep when FCA purchased Chrysler. Since that time, FCA, of course, spun off Ferrari, so that's its own company. So now you have Alfa Romeo, which is a very well-known brand, and Sergio believed that it was one of the most well-known brands in the world, and brands have value. But the company has struggled here in America. It has brought cars over, and those cars have had reliability issues. They've had dealership rollout issues. It's just been a tough time, tough go of it, a hard road. So the real value in FCA, of course, is Ram, which is making money hand over fist, and Jeep, which is selling cars worldwide.
Now, some of the speculation I've been following online is if PSA were to return to the U.S. market, they wouldn't return selling traditional cars that you can get in, start up, and drive. It would be, based on some speculation, more of a mobility-focused company. So a way to get from point A to point B, maybe autonomously and under the power of electrons.
Yeah, and the other thing that I think FCA gets from Peugeot is access to a lot more modern platforms. One of the problems with FCA right now is that they have brands like Chrysler, which have very old, very, very old, actually Mercedes-based platforms from when they were part of Mercedes.
Right.
Same problem with Dodge, right? And even though Jeep and Ram have new platforms, in terms of kind of just a platform like you can use like Volkswagen, right, where you can use it for many different tops.
Modular.
They don't have a lot of that right now, and so they will have access to Peugeot's more modern platforms, I believe.
Yeah, that's cool. So with this merger, they'll be the fourth largest automaker in the U.S., larger than all except Volkswagen, Toyota, and the Nissan, Renault, Mitsubishi alliance. Now, the funny thing is FCA has been looking for a merger like this for some time now, because if you recall, a little while back, there were talks between FCA and Renault about coming together.
Yeah, I think it was one of Sergio's long-standing goals. And what's happening now, Tommy, is there's a seismic shift in the automobile industry. And electrification and autonomy are now pretty much accepted as the way of the future. And when you have that kind of a disruptive seismic shift in the way that people drive, in the way that cars are built, and in the way the cars are powered, then you have a lot of money that needs to be spent on research and development. And it's a lot cheaper to merge and then to cut costs to develop those new platforms than it is to kind of go out and do it on your own. And I think that's what Sergio and probably now Carlos and John saw in the merger potential of these two companies, right? It's going to be the ability to cut costs and to electrify quicker.
Right, for sure. Now the funny thing is there actually have been mergers between U.S. specific auto manufacturers and the French in the past. So for example, AMC and Renault in the 1980s, Renault had held a controlling stake in AMC for a while. So we saw some of these vehicles, think of things like the Renault Alliance, make their way to the U.S., which was a kind of combined effort between the Americans and the French to build vehicles. The Renault Le Car is another one. In the past, it hasn't been super successful.
No, French cars have not done well here.
No, not that well. Although we did get some really cool ones here. But I think this is a much more promising era with some much more promising vehicles from both of the manufacturers.
So when Fiat merged with Chrysler, obviously that meant that in America we got a lot of forbidden fruit, right? We got Alfa Romeo, we got Fiat.
Right.
But those brands have not done extremely well here in America. And so will brands like the French brands now come over, like Peugeot? Will we see Peugeot dealerships?
Or on the other end of that, will we start seeing more Rams infiltrate the European market? So are you going to be able to buy a new 2500 in Belgium?
Yeah, I know. I would love to say yes. I would love to say that you Europeans are going to be able to get, your hands on like gladiators.
Your Cummins 3500, yeah.
But we don't know that, and practically it's way too early to tell about that. But let's talk about the things that we do know about and we can talk about with certainty. So last year, the two companies sold 8.7 million cars, Tommy, globally, on a combined revenue of $190 billion. These are big companies. They have a combined workforce of over 400,000 employees, and I think that's probably the biggest part of the story. Of course, the companies going into this merger will tell you that they're not going to close plants, that they're not going to reduce jobs, but part of any merger, right, is cost cutting and consolidation. And part of cost cutting consolidation is laying off people. So I really wonder what it will mean for the workforce of both these companies. And in Europe, keep in mind, especially in France, the unions are very strong, not as strong as they are over here. So they have a lot more political sway than they do here. So I don't know if that will protect more jobs, say in France, but here in America, we'll see.
Now, one of the interesting things, and I was reading this on BBC,
Yeah?
is there's concerns of whether or not the brand Vauxhall is going to
Survive?
remain relevant and in the UK. So according to the BBC interview they did, merger talks combined with Brexit uncertainty is certainly deeply unsettling for Vauxhall's UK workforce. So, we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of politics, not only in the automotive side, but also making imports and tariffs happen among different nations. And we're not talking like America and France. Like, these are two companies that are so enriched in two different continents. For example, FCA builds in Mexico and the United States and Canada. The PSA groups builds all over Europe, including the UK. So it certainly is going to be interesting watching how these plans play out going forward.
Yeah, and obviously regionally we've seen a lot of importance put on where vehicles are built, right? Politically in America right now, our politics is that where cars are built has become central to where people live versus where they're built. So GM is struggling with building cars in Mexico. We've got all kinds of issues with free trade happening right now, and I don't know how this storyline plays into that. That's probably more for people who are much smarter at this than we are. So let's talk about the questions that remain, Tommy. So first and foremost, what will the new company's name be? That's to be determined yet. I hope it's something like Car Shark.
Yeah,
I think that'd be cool.
Give it a cool name.
Yeah, give it a cool name. It won't be. It'll be something like that, right? FCPSA.
Yes, yeah, exactly. There you go. Just keep adding letters as it gets bigger and bigger.
And of course, there's a ton of regulatory scrutiny that's still to be applied here. Will the regulators sign off on this merger? And what will that mean? That is yet to be determined. And of course, the biggest question, which we kind of briefly touched upon, is job losses.
Right.
Companies say there'll be no plants closed, but the merger will happen and costs will have to be saved. So will plants actually get closed? I think if I were a worker at one of both of these companies' plants, I'd be paying close attention to the news right now, especially as I feel we're heading toward a downturn in the global economy.
And one of the fastest, well, probably is it the fastest? One of the fastest growing markets for automobiles
is China.
China. What is this going to mean for the Chinese market? That's another huge question on investors' minds.
Yeah, and personally, what does it mean to me and you? Here in America, does it mean that 2 years from now we'll be driving around in Peugeots? I hope so, or Opels. I hope so. Isn't it ironic that a couple of years ago, Mary Barra, the CEO of GM, sold Opel to PSA, and now, really. Her across-the-town rival, FCA, owns that brand.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy. That's just crazy how the world works.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's a lot of questions that have yet to be answered, but we wanted to kind of give you the news as quickly as possible. In general, I think that consolidation is the way of the world, and this may just be the beginning of other brands coming together, Tommy. I'm not sure that we're seeing the end of it. We may just be in the start of it. So there may be other brands that are out there that will also go down this road. I think to myself of the Supra, right, which was a combined effort between
Toyota and
BMW, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of platform sharing that's been happening recently, and whenever you get platform sharing, it's kind of a harbinger of things to come. Companies first start working together on cars, and then eventually that leads to these kinds of mergers.
For sure.
So there you go, guys. We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Do you think that this is good or bad? Will you have more or less choice? And will you be paying more or less for cars? Those are questions that I think we still need to answer. So let us know in the comments below. As always, you saw it first, hopefully, on the Fastlane car.
Yep, and go back to tflcar.com for all of the latest news on this merger.
See you guys next time. Ciao.